Things are not looking good for the French establishment this weekend. Yesterday was Act 18, I believe, of the Yellow Vest protests, meaning it was the 18th weekend in which people have rioted in various cities in France. And yesterday in Paris, it was the most violent, certainly, of any of the past weeks, or acts as they call them. In fact, I'd go so far as to say at this point that we've gone past the old 1968 level of violence that people have been comparing the Yellow Vests to, because that looked pretty tame compared to this. From what I can understand of French history, this seems to me to be the most violent. Yesterday seems to be the most violent unrest in Paris since 1871 during the Paris Commune, in which the people of Paris essentially rebelled against the government of France overall, and the government actually couldn't operate in Paris. They had to go to Versailles. Now, ultimately, that ended with the French government putting down the rebellion pretty brutally and executing a lot of people. So we're not quite to that point of that level of violence yet, but that seems to be the next most violent day in the past after yesterday. The Yellow Vest protesters are burning businesses that they really associated with sort of elites in their country. They were burning high-end restaurants and boutiques on the Champs-Élysées. I can never say that right. Forgive my poor French. In addition to the sort of high-end luxury sort of businesses, they were also torched a couple banks, from what I could see. Now, the problem is with these folks, they're not torching standalone buildings just to take out their rage against the elites. They're also burning buildings that have other businesses and other residences in them. So, for example, one story that's going around that makes the Yellow Vests look very bad is that they tried to burn down a bank, but that bank was only on the first floor of a 7-story building. The rest of the stories, the other 6 stories, were all residential apartments, and a single mother and her daughter were almost killed. Now, I was reading an AP article on the events this morning, and they managed to find, it would seem, quite a few people, and again, this is probably still a minority, but quite a few people in the crowd who were willing to endorse the violence, even though they were not the perpetuator, or they were not the perpetrators of violence themselves. They were saying that they thought that the violence helped the cause because it finally would get the media attention. Now, to me, that's pretty sick and twisted, because, frankly, as big as the protests have been for the last 4 months now, we just hit the 4-month anniversary this weekend. The last 4 months of the Yellow Vest protests, you would think that they wouldn't need violence to get on the news. You'd think that this would be the top news anywhere. I mean, how many governments have had massive protests against them every Saturday for 4 months? I mean, that's not happening to anybody. I mean, in Algeria, they had protests for like 3 days, and it was the top of the news. And not only that, they got the president to step down after only a few days. I mean, it was maybe like a week and a half, max. Remember the Arab Spring, in which you had people protesting in, like, one part of Cairo, Tahrir Square? Remember how big that news was for as long as it went on? Pretty sure the Tahrir Square protests did not last 4 months. But anyway, considering that they're not getting much media coverage, I guess the Yellow Vest protesters are so desperate to this point that they think the only way they can get on the evening news in the rest of the world is by burning down buildings and being violent and openly, and essentially just, going into chaos. Which is, textbook terrorism. I mean, that's violence towards a political end. But frankly, I think all government action really in and of itself is terrorism, because governments also act out of violence for political purposes by definition. With that said, I don't exactly think that the protesters are allies of mine by any means. These seems to be a coalition of left and right-wing populists, neither of whom like the current French elite, which I tend to agree with. I don't like them either, but they tend to not necessarily like them for different reasons than I dislike the French elite. My problem with the French elite is that they use the coercive powers of the state to push down other people in society and to enrich themselves, whereas I think the folks in the Yellow Vest movement probably don't have a problem necessarily with the state as such, but would rather capture the state from the elites and then use the power of that state to push down the elites for a change and then spread the wealth around to the rest of the people, whether they're left or right wing. I think that the so-called right wing in France is still largely egalitarian, because in modern France, right wing is still within a French revolutionary context. So the right wing in France is not necessarily against the French Revolution, as the term right wing used to mean. A lot of people forget that the term right and left wing comes from the French National Assembly after the Revolution. The left wing were people who supported the Revolution, and the right wing were people who opposed the Revolution and supported the monarchy and traditional institutions like the Catholic Church. But that aside, the Yellow Vest protests seem very organic and unorganized to me. I can't see any clear, coherent message coming out of there other than what they don't like, which would tend to signal their authenticity to me, because it seems to be an organic reaction against the French elite. Which means that if the Yellow Vests continue to gain prominence, and if they were actually ever to affect any real political change in France, it's not exactly certain which way the country would move or what would happen. Because frankly, this isn't a liberal democratic revolution, because you're already starting from a point of Western liberal democracy in France, so you could only move in some other direction. So this is very different from a lot of the protest movements that we've seen in, say, emerging markets in third world countries over the last couple decades, in which you see people protesting against their dictators in favor of liberal democracy supported by the West, the CIA and other intelligence agencies. The Yellow Vest movement is something completely different, and I really have no idea what would come out of it. It could go into some sort of neo-fascist or communist dictatorship of the proletariat, or whatever you want to call it. It could be. It really could be anything. I mean, hell, they could go to. It could become a Swiss directorial decentralized republic. My point is that really I have no idea what's going to happen in France. I'd be very interested in someone who thinks they might. I doubt anyone really knows for sure, because there is no head to this snake, essentially. There's just a bunch of chaos. There's people who don't like what's going on. And when that happens, that's a very opportune time for a strong man to step in and impose order. And I'll tell you, Macron is not the one to do it. Frankly, if this wasn't France, I would think that in any other country, that this would be a good time for a military coup to take place. Because I think Macron has been completely delegitimized and has proved to just about everyone that he can't handle the job that he's in. Now, of course, even if there was a coup, I don't think that the Yellow Vest protests would subside unless somehow the coup plotters were able to somehow identify with them, which is what happened in Portugal in 1974, some of you might remember. Yeah, so things are getting scary in France. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to like this video if you found anything of value from it. And I'll see you all tomorrow, because I do post up daily videos. Have a good day.